Hello and welcome to today's video. We are looking at descriptive writing and these two absolutely powerful techniques that will transform your description so that it gets the top grades. We will begin with this picture. When I showed it to my class, they found it not very inspiring, and that's brilliant. That is perfect exam practice. So there's a picture which you have to learn how to look at. And then I'm going to take you to my two most powerful techniques. One will be how to construct an extended metaphor, and then the other will look at constructing the description, particularly through this brilliant technique of looking at contrast. As you'll have noticed, there are also 6 other techniques that I'll teach you as you go through the video. But these are the two main ones that are going to power your writing so that it's incredibly successful. Right, well, the first thing is jumping straight in with a metaphor is often harder for our brains to do. We often think with similes, we say, what's that like? What does it remind me of? And because it's what it's like, it gives us a simile straight away. Well, don't be afraid of that. That's a good way in to our metaphor. So I'll show you how to do that. And then the most powerful part of the metaphor is the verbs. So let's go to the picture and see how this works. So I'm staring at these giraffes and thinking, well, what do they remind me of? When I did this with my class, they came up with this brilliant idea that the giraffes were like cranes, and then they looked at the smaller animals, the zebras, and thought, well, if the giraffes are cranes, then the zebras could be like trucks, and they constructed a kind of building site image here. And so their extended metaphor looked at what the giraffes were doing and the zebras were doing, and compared that to what cranes could do and what trucks could do. I didn't. I did this on my own, and for me, the giraffes looked like they were standing tall and erect, as though they were standing to attention. I thought, well, that's like a soldier. Let's run with that idea, and that's where I went. I thought, okay, they're like soldiers. So what do soldiers do? So my first verb I thought about was how they stand erect. Where would they do that? Well, possibly on guard or on parade. Okay, so I'll use that idea. And that was the beginning of my writing. I didn't plan it. I just had that image there, and the simile would then give me my ideas for the extended metaphor, and that would carry me through. So here's my first paragraph. The giraffes stand like sentinels, tired and slow. Their necks swing in slow motion as though they're on parade in an uncomfortable heat. And yet they have brushed up well. Their coats shine, and the intricate pattern of diamonds and hexagons and parallelograms knit together perfectly, worn with pride. They salute each other like officers at the mess before they tuck in to a 3-course meal. So what I've got going on here in yellow are the verbs. And obviously I'm thinking in a military way. So obviously they're standing tall. I've got this idea of soldiers swinging their arms and legs in slow motion. And just that word swing reminds the reader of that idea of the soldiers. I've got the idea of soldiers spending ages the brushing up, brushing their shoes, making sure their uniform is spick and span. And so brushed up and shine come from that same semantic field of soldiers on parade. And this idea of soldiers doing everything together in unison. So that image, again, that verb fits with the idea of the soldiers. Worn, okay, they wear a uniform. It's not necessarily soldiers, but it fits again with the semantic field, as does salute and this idea of tucking into food. So once I've got the verbs, they just come to me as a logical part of the extended metaphor. And in green, I've got language that refers again to that semantic field of the soldiers. So they're like sentinels, that's soldiers on guard, on parade. This idea that the soldiers always take pride in what they're doing and what they're wearing. So it's not exclusively for soldiers, but it then fits in with that semantic field. And officers at the mess, you need to know that the mess is what they call their dining room, and obviously calling them officers again has that same semantic field, um, which fits with soldiers. So that's how I play with the extended metaphor. The other thing at the back of my mind is that I always want to start my sentences with different words. They're not especially adventurous here. The, their, and their, warn, they. And I get better at varying that as I go through. Obviously, there's one repetition of there here. Um, but this ability to vary the starts of your sentences will just make your writing more interesting, no matter what kind of writing you're doing. I also have this secret technique of putting in contrast as often as I can. So here I've got the ideas of the giraffes in an uncomfortable heat, and that's immediately contrasted with, and yet they have brushed up well. They still look neat, despite the fact that they're terribly uncomfortable. And then I develop that contrast with how their uniform is worn with pride. Now, when I start my next paragraph, I'm immediately thinking about contrast again. So beneath them, the lesser ranked zebras. So the idea that the zebras are smaller and also lesser is a contrast. The lesser ranked zebras march, head down, right leg forward in a slow maneuver, hoovering up the crumbs. Again, here's another contrast. The giraffes had a three-course meal, but the zebras only get crumbs. The self-satisfied giraffes pretend not to notice, with eyes only for each other. If we go back to those earlier techniques, I'm playing with that semantic field of the military again. So the zebras are in ranks and they're lesser ranked. They're not officers, so they're just like privates. They march, and I've emphasized that with this idea of the right leg forward. And the maneuver is a typically military word for the way that armies move. So I'm keeping that going all the way through. And again, you'll notice that I'm trying to vary my sentence starts beneath them and the not very exciting the. Contrast also informs the structure of my sentences. Um, and writers seem to do this almost instinctively. So here we've got a long, complex sentence with lots of detail, which is immediately contrasted with a shorter one with brief detail. Here I've repeated the pattern, a long, complex sentence with lots of detail, followed by a really short one. And because I've practiced this, I actually do that without thinking now. It's just part of the rhythm of the way that I write. If we go back to that second paragraph, you'll see that I've changed the pattern. There are two long, complex sentences with lots of noun phrases and subordinate clauses in them. So why have I broken that pattern? Well, I didn't really think about it at the time, but you'll see in the next paragraph that I reimpose it. So where I've got some really long sentences here, I'll contrast it with short ones later on. So this is the rest of the description. At ground level, a lone face watches. A woman in a wheelchair, perhaps. She appears transfixed, unable to move, wondering if they are happy here, caged and well fed. They care nothing for her. So you'll notice there's that contrast, two short sentences, then a much longer one, and then the short sentence again. That just constant flitting from one to the other. It just gives a real rhythm to your writing. The other thing I've done is I've introduced a contrast of viewpoint. This is my second one. So in the previous paragraph, the contrast was with the zebras, and now it's a woman who's outside. Now, I did that because I spotted this little face here. I've no idea whether it's actually a woman or whether she's actually in a wheelchair. And remember, you can deviate from this picture as much as you like. You know, you're not confined to it. But I've given you an example here that comes from the picture because it's much easier to see how the extended metaphor works that way. Now I can introduce final contrast. And this contrast here goes back to both animals, the zebras and the giraffes, looking at the human. And I flipped the situation. So it looks to the giraffes as though they're in the natural world and the humans are the ones who are exhibited in the zoo. So in their zoo, the exhibits change all the time. The people come and go. Their markings are drab and they smell of ice cream, sun creams, face creams. People are artificial, loud and fake. How would they cope in the real world? As though hearing a secret order, the animals about face and return to quarters. So hopefully you can pick up there that this is from their point of view and they're puzzled at the people. Now, the reason this is such a successful technique in your descriptive writing is it gets the reader to think of things in a different way that they've never thought before. The extended metaphor did that, didn't it? It asked you to imagine the giraffes as soldiers, and you wouldn't normally do that. And that's the great trick of these two techniques. It asks you to see things in a completely different way. When I've ended it, I've returned back to the extended metaphor. So a secret order, again, that's the semantic field of the military. And so are quarters, that's where they live. They're just referred to as quarters, officers' quarters, soldiers' quarters. And about face, of course, is a military instruction for how you turn around. So to go in the opposite direction. It's in yellow here because it's a verb. And you can see again how the verbs power the metaphor. There are three of them. And I should also draw your attention to this there here. That's my third one in this piece of writing, which you might think is breaking my advice of starting sentences in a different way if you can. But this there is to contrast to the earlier ones where we were thinking about the markings on the giraffes. And that's deliberate because it makes the humans seem like animals with their drab markings and their fake coats of ice cream, sun cream, and face cream. So well done for sticking to the end of the video. Here are the three things that I taught you about extending the metaphor. Start with a simile, start also with the verbs, look for words associated with the thing you're comparing it to and try to find a similarity. And then constructing the description through contrast. It's the most important point and it's the most difficult, so I've stuck that last. I just want to remind you of the other things that we did. So I try to start most sentences with a different word. I show off with long sentences with lists of noun phrases or subordinate clauses, and of course they're then contrasted with the shorter sentences. I wasn't explicit about this, but often students and some teachers will overload their writing with, it shouldn't say adjectives, hold on. That's better. Avoid adverbs. These are the words which you'll see ending in ly. I didn't use a single one in that description, and because Stephen King tells me not to, and so what Stephen King says goes. Adverbs really slow down your writing. So I will use them if I really want to slow the pace, but otherwise, no. And then this is the killer technique. Always look for contrast. Contrast the viewpoint. You saw that with the giraffes, then the zebras, then the woman, and then back to the animals again. But you can do that with the time. You can go back into the past or forward into the future, or you can change the focus of the action or the status of the people. Here I had the zebras at a different status to the giraffes, who also had a different status to the woman who was watching in. And then I flipped that as though the woman watching in and the rest of the people suddenly had this lower status. They were the objects or the animals in the zoo. Or anything which occurs to you. You know, if you will find all kinds of contrasts once you practice this that you can just slip into your writing. And contrast is where good writing is made. If you're not contrasting, your writing is not going to get into the top grade. So why not give that a go yourself? Go back to the image and write it as though they're not soldiers. Choose a different extended metaphor, post it in a comment below the video, and if it's any good, I'll mark it and I'll make a video of it for you on how to improve it as well. Good luck with your revision, enjoy your writing, and see you soon on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe.